Hey everybody, Jessica Tucker, owner, operator of Total Health and Fitness of Tampa Bay. Today we are making GAPS compliant meat stock. And before we get into the recipe and the how-to, let's talk a little bit about the differences between meat stock and bone broth and why, for our purposes, we want to use the meat stock when we're doing intro GAPS and throughout the process of healing your gut. The difference between meat stock and a bone broth has to do with a couple things. First of all, meat stock meat stock cooks for less time. Now, a bone broth is going to cook anywhere from 12 to 24 hours, and that's going to break down all those bones and all the stuff that's inside of the bones, which is not necessarily bad for you, is going to get into your stock or your broth. But for the purposes of intro GAPS and when we are working on healing our gut, we want to stick with meat stock. And the reason why is it cooks a little bit less time, the bones aren't going to break down as fully, and it's not going to release as much histamine into your stock. And histamine is an issue that a lot of people who have leaky gut, those of us who are doing GAPS, a lot of us have issues with too much histamine. And symptoms of histamine intolerance include migraine headaches, bloating, painful joints, and all sorts of things like that. So we want to keep the levels of histamine lower as we're healing our gut. Once your gut is more healed, you'll be able to tolerate the bone broth. Again, that's not necessarily bad for you. It has lots of the good stuff that's inside of those bones from the animals that you're cooking down. But for intro GAPS, it's a little too harsh. So we're going to start by making a really nice healing meat stock. And I'm showing you today chicken stock, but this can be done with fish, it can be done with beef, it can be done with bison. Basically whatever animal you have, you can make a meat stock with. And if you want to try something other than the chicken, then of course I'll give you the instructions and the how-to on that. But most people, because chicken stock is a little bit more mild, it doesn't have quite as much of the gelatin that you might get from like a beef stock. So a lot of people like to kind of start with the chicken stock because it's a little bit more mild. It's easier to drink and not quite so heavy on the flavor of the other things that you might experience. So we're going to start with the meat stock and we'll work on this. All right, so for our meat stock, let's talk about the ingredients. Right over here, I have my whole chicken, and my butcher was kind enough to cut it up for me into pieces. And over here, we have the vegetables that we're going to put in there. I have about 3 whole carrots chopped up. I think I put in 4 stalks of celery because they were kind of thinner stalks. So I've got 4 stalks of celery in slices. And then I've got 2 full onions chopped up into eighths and a nice bunch of parsley. We've got, now you can use either lemon juice or apple cider vinegar. For intro GAPS, I would recommend going with the lemon juice. And then of course I have water, and we have Himalayan sea salt, and saving the kind of gross one for last, chicken feet. Now these, you can eat them if you like chicken feet. I personally cannot eat chicken feet, will not eat chicken feet, but I like to put them in the meat stock because they have a lot of nice cartilage that breaks down into the collagen that is one of the most healing parts of the meat stock. So now we're going to talk about how to build our meat stock. Building our meat stock, I have this nice big stock pot out here, and we're going to put our chicken that's been broken down into the pot. And this is a whole chicken with all the bones and everything. We're going to put it into the bottom. It's going to mostly cover everything there. Skin and all, just put it all in there. And see, it's taking up quite a bit of the stock pot. This is the chicken neck, and you want to make sure to get that in there too. And the wings. All right, so now we are going to put in, next we're just going to pour a splash of the lemon juice over top of the chicken. And we do that because the acid from the lemon is going to start breaking down the chicken as it cooks. So we'll get all the good stuff outside or in the bones and into the chicken into our broth. Next, we're going to move on to the water. Now, you don't want to put too much water in, just enough to cover the meat. This is 4 cups here. I think I'm going to add another probably 1 or 2 cups just so our vegetables get some water in there as well. All right, topping off the water. So now our chicken is just covered with water. And now we are going to put in those lovely chicken feet. This kind of grosses me out, but we're going to put them in here. Just right in there with all the other stuff. Ooh. I know, they don't look lovely. But the benefits of the collagen that's going to come out of them are going to make it worth it in the end. So now that that's all in there, looks like we need a little more water. So I'm going to get that. Now, for the purposes of this stock, make sure you are using a nice filtered water. If you have a reverse osmosis filter, that's best. I use a Berkey water filter, and that's good as well. Or if you use a bottled, filtered bottled water, that's acceptable. But for a good healing broth, using tap water is not going to be ideal. So now we've got, and this is about another 4 or 3 cups of water on top of the 4 I already put in there. So once I put in the vegetables, we may add a little bit more water. But the reason we don't want to have too much water in our stock is because we want it to concentrate down just enough. Now, the more water you have, the less of the gelatin is going to come out of the bones, and the more watery your broth will be. Now, the gelatin that's coming from the bones is actually the healing stuff, so you want that gelatin. But if you have a hard time with the mouthfeel of it, then a little bit of extra water isn't going to hurt you, and you'll still get most of the good stuff. But in a good, better, best situation, best is going to be the slightly more concentrated soup with the gelatin that's coming from the chicken. And better is just, extra watery stock. And there's not really just a good option. So we're going to go with better and best on this one. All right, now we're adding in the vegetables into our soup. I've got the carrots. Here we go. Getting them all in there. And then we've got the onions. I'll put those over there. And I have more, but I think I'm going to stop about there. And then we're going to put our celery in there. And then our parsley. Just add right to the top. And I think I am going to add probably another cup or 2 of water, just so that all of the vegetables are covered as well. Now that my meat stock has come to a boil and is starting to cook really nicely, I'm going to take a spoon and we're going to start skimming the foam off the top of it. I've got it going onto a plate over here that I can then just spray off later. So pulling the foam off as much as I can. If you don't get all of it, it's fine. Just keep doing that until you get as close to clear as you can. Now we're going to turn the heat down to about medium and continue to let it simmer. Now, you can cover it to cook it, but I like to keep it uncovered because then I can kind of keep an eye on how it's doing. So if you're going to uncover it, just make sure you're watching. And if you cover it, make sure you check it pretty frequently. But we're going to let this simmer for probably 2 to 2.5 hours. Once the chicken is cooked fully through and is starting to get ready to fall off the bone, but we don't want it completely falling off the bone, then we're going to pull it out and we'll go on with the next step. So this is boiling a little bit more than I want it to be boiling right now. So we're gonna turn the heat down a little bit more. It's just under medium now. And I mean, obviously every stove is gonna be different. So just keep an eye on it. You don't want it really boiling on top. You want it kind of, cooking underneath. It's simmering, so cooking underneath, and then the top is relatively still. So we're gonna let the temperature come down just a little bit more. Alternatively, if you want to do this in a crock pot instead, you can. Instead of cooking it for 2 to 2.5 hours, you're probably going to cook it for 3 to 5 hours. Actually, no, it's going to be 4 to 6 hours. But again, you don't want to cook it too long. Cook it just until the meat is fully cooked through, and you can easily cut it off, the meat off of the bones. So we're going to let this cook a little bit longer here. So here is our chicken stock fully cooked at this point. And as you can see, I'm going to start pulling it out and taking the meat off of the bones. All right, so the meat stock has been cooking for just under 2 hours, but I checked the chicken and it is fully cooked. So we're going to start the process of taking the cooked chicken out of the stock pot, removing the meat from the bones, and we're going to want to reserve that. Now, once chicken is fully cooked, it will keep in the fridge for up to 4 days. If it's going to go for more than 4 days, you're going to want to make sure you freeze it before the 4 days, because after that, it's not really safe to eat anymore. So I'm going to pull the chicken off, and I'll get a couple pictures of that as we go. But that's the next step in this process. And then when it gets time to do the ladling into the jars, I will show you how we do that as well. So what I did, and everybody has a different way that they do their own stock, is I found a nice big bowl and I put it in the sink and I poured my stock through this, which is kind of like a sieve, but it's like the steamer basket that goes with a pot. It was the best way I could find to strain out the bits of the chicken along with the vegetables and everything. And look at this nice rich broth that we've got in this bowl. So after I let that cool for a couple minutes, then we're going to bottle it. And in the meantime, I'm going to go pick the meat off of the bones, and I'm going to reserve that as we discussed. Now I'm going to show you as I'm going through the soup pot. I'm basically going through and picking the bones out of there. And I've got a bowl here that is primarily bones. And I'm not going to eat the chicken feet, so I'm just putting the chicken feet into that bowl. Now, if you can, and if you will eat chicken feet, they are a fantastic source of collagen and the other connective tissue in there that is going to help accelerate the healing of your gut. I just can't do it, so I generally don't eat the chicken feet. My husband, he will eat them. He's from the islands. He doesn't hate chicken feet, so he'll eat them. So I'm reserving them for him, and if he wants to eat them tonight, then he'll have some chicken feet with dinner. But I've got a plate with all of the meat that I'm pulling out of the stock pot with the other stuff. Now, the vegetables on intro stage of GAPS, you're going to want to eat them as soft as possible. We don't want them super crunchy still. We want to start to break down that fiber a little bit to make it really gentle. If you want to blend those up and add them to your stock, that's a really good way to do that, just to make sure it can really help keep your gut in good shape as we're doing the healing process. A little bit later on in GAPS, maybe stage 3, 4, you can eat them just like this. But in the early couples, the first 2 or 3 stages, you're going to want to make sure your vegetables are all very, very, very well cooked and soft. All right, we're wrapping it up. Here is my broth in my nice big bowl. I've got a mason jar and I've got a sieve. I believe this is a 5 or 5.5 inch sieve. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the sieve on top of the mason jar, and then I'm going to pour the broth into the jar. And unfortunately, I can't record and pour, so I'm going to have to do this off of camera, and then I'll show you the finished product. All right, here is the finished product. I'm going to set it down so you can see. I left about 1 inch of head space plus the 1/2 inch for the top there. that way, if you have to freeze it, it has room to expand up and it won't crack your jar. So that's why we put that much headspace in there, and that will be it. And here is my finished product of the chicken, all pulled off of the bones. And of course, this is my bone bowl. I'm not going to use that, probably. I'm going to toss that, other than chicken feet. My husband might eat those. And then here is the vegetables that I've strained out of it. Again, if you're on intro gaps, make sure you can, I would recommend blending them up so they stay nice and easy on your gut, because we're trying to keep things very low fiber while we're in the early stages of the GAPS protocol. So that's a good way to handle that. If you blend those up, you can pour them back into your stock when you're heating that up to drink every day, along with whatever meat and any other really soft, well-cooked vegetables you're going to eat, especially in intro gaps. So that is our finished product, and I will continue to pour the rest of my broth into mason jars. They can be stored in the refrigerator. Now, if you're going to use them after about 4 days, make sure you boil it for about 10 minutes before you drink it. But your best bet, really, if you're not going to drink it, or if you're building up stock for starting your GAPS protocol, I would put it in either mason jars, or if you want to put it into square glass pans and freeze them, and then pop the squares out of the glass pans and just wrap them really, really well in saran wrap. That's another good way to store your broth. So that's it from Total Health and Fitness. Thank you for joining me.